So glad to see all of you. I know it's Labor Day. I know it's a long weekend. A lot of people traveling. And yet, you chose to come over here. And I'm grateful. I'm happy to see you. And I hope all of the experience thus far brings you some rest and some joy. Happy birthday once again, Terry. You're a beloved member of this community. And I wish I had cake here today to make it even more meaningful for sure. But we'll celebrate together soon. 75 years. That's phenomenal. Good. Today, friends, for those who are visiting us, we've been studying the Gospel of Matthew for some time now. And today our journey continues. If you don't have a Bible, you can find them underneath your seats. And today we're going to be reading Matthew chapter 23 in our long journey. We're almost there, guys. The book ends in 28, so we're almost there. I'm excited because, for what's coming next. After we covered the gospel, at least one of them, because there are three others with different angles and different stories and different emphasis. But for what we're doing together, I can't do another. We have to move somewhere else, and I'm excited. It's page 777 for those who have the Bible underneath the seat. Matthew chapter 23. That's what we will be reading today. But before we read, obviously, we always do a little recap for those who weren't here in the previous weeks. And I hope that's okay. Is that okay, guys? Can we study a little longer, read a little longer, stay together a little longer? Good. So Matthew 23, let's do a little recap. Last week, Jesus finished answering questions. He's at the temple. He flipped the table. It's his last approach to Jerusalem. Now he's going to be killed, so it's the last everything. He flips the table at the temple, tells stories, and responds to questions. And then he asks a question of his own, and there's silence. So now, after evaluating the temple, its effectiveness in spiritual bankruptcy, Jesus turns to the crowds that are still around him to speak of the scribes and Pharisees. And again, these are religious leaders, as you know, lay leaders, actually, who were deeply involved in the Bible and the will of God, trying to do what was right, keeping the law, good people devoted to God. So interestingly, Jesus has always strong words for them. And the temptation when we read this is again to feel good about ourselves because we don't do any of these things, and that's the risk. So when we read, we always need to be evaluating our heart, our mind, our own religion, so that we might sort of place it in a healthy place, the place that Jesus would like it to be. So today Jesus begins, and I call this on YouTube, you'll see this sermon today as the most ignored chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. All right? It's the chapter we're going to start reading today. The most ignored, Tony. 23. Why? Because basically Christianity, religion, since Jesus spoke these words, have sort of operated in the opposite of what Jesus has taught in this chapter. So it's an important one. And last night I thought I had it all ready for you guys. I said, okay, I think I know what I'm going to do. We're going to cover the entire chapter. So I sat down to read my notes, and I'm like, nope, this is not going to work. So I had to redo the whole thing last night. So we're going to go slow. Again, instead of doing the whole thing, we're going to do just the first 12 verses. And that's what we're going to read today. So we need to listen, not to feel good about ourselves only, but to discern, again, if Jesus' indictment applies to us. And before we read, which is important, I need to review and expand two things, again, for those who weren't here, so that we can be on the same page before we read. Number one, we must never forget why the Gospel of Matthew and all other Gospels were written. They were written for the church, for people, for Israel, for people to understand how the community of Jesus would behave since the death and resurrection of Jesus. Very important. The disciples were all there listening so they could understand what Jesus' movement was about, what the kingdom was about, and how different it was from the kingdoms of men. And as Jesus exposes today the psychology, the methodology of scribes and Pharisees, he is giving his disciples and all of us a path. Consider today this speech an x-ray. Have you guys done x-rays recently? Have you ever I mean, I'm sure all of you, Dave used to do that all the time, I'm sure, right, Dave? People's mouths there to see what's happening. You know, it's funny, the first time we did it with the kids, they were blown away by the whole thing. You know, Benjamin, I think it was his arm for something, and he's like, say, Benjamin, this is your arm. It's like, no, it's not. I said, oh yeah, that's what's inside your arm. So he was blown away by the whole thing. And you know, what's the purpose of x-rays? Dave, I'm going to resort to you because you're the expert. What's the main purpose of x-rays, Dave? To see what's going on that's a perfect answer. Internally. Because outside, as a dentist, I'm sure you can look. I sent you a picture of Benjamin's tooth the other day, right? It's like, yeah, I can have an idea. But to know what's happening inside, it's a whole other world. It's a whole other thing. Paula, you guys have been praying for her. I'm so grateful. She's feeling much better, and she's here today. And she was freaking out at home in the past weeks because the headaches, the pressure, the whole thing. Normally, you think of the worst. You think there's something in my head. There's something off. Yvette, you've been through this before. You know that feeling, right? It's a horrible feeling, right? So to have an MRI and then the doctor say, hey, it's all clear. What happens next? You're like, all right, I'm still in pain, but at least there's nothing happening there. So we go to, you guys are with me, right? I don't need to expand on x-rays. Matthew 23 is a spiritual, a religious x-ray. It's going to penetrate the inside and put the disciples, the church, and all of us in a place where we understand, once and for all, hopefully, that what matters to God is what is happening inside. Are you guys with me? Inside. And that was the talk last week, right? That if God is the source of love and that when we love Him out of this gratitude, what happens is that will lead to outside realities. Yes, we are grateful, but suddenly we find ourselves doing, loving, serving others. So if we're talking about externals, yes, those things matter and are important, but they are only true because something has happened inside. Are you guys with me? Yes or no? The temptation of the Pharisees and the scribes in their religion, as they shared with people, was that their devotion to God was divorced from their responsibility toward others. And here the confusions begin, because suddenly we think we need to be doing things for God to love Him back. We've got to go to church, we've got to do this and do that, and our whole religion is aimed toward God, when God is saying, love is within you, and the true way to love me will always appear as you relate to others. God is not sitting up there saying, oh, I hope they tithe because I'm running low on cash. No. Why do we put money in there? Because that money will reach people. We'll keep ministries going. Why? So are you guys with me? Again, it's all about gratitude. And the evidence of love for God will always appear as we treat one another and others outside of here. Always. That's the proof in the pudding is how we relate to others. Always. That is how we love God. So far, so good? Are we together? So that's number one thing I wanted to remind you. And the interesting thing, too, I just put this up for the Bible nerds like myself that like more information. So basically, the Gospel of Matthew is divided in 5 great speeches of Jesus. All right? We covered all of them thus far. Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 all the way to 7. Remember that? Huge speech. Then Jesus does miracles. There's other things happening. Another big speech. Remember the instructions to the disciples, how the ministry should go, how mission should be. If you don't know what I'm talking about, they're all on YouTube, still there for you to watch. We cover that one. Then that whole section on parables. Remember the parables of the kingdom? Jesus taught a bunch of parables, trying to, mustard seed, all of these things. And each little parable is like a little mustard seed that may seem like nothing, but it has so much power. So there you go. Then Jesus had that whole speech with Peter about my church and everything else, the community, what the community of Jesus would look like. And today, we are sort of finishing up this last big section that will end actually in Matthew chapter 25. But this is the last big chunk of Jesus' speeches. He's been responding to questions thus far, sharing stories and things like that, but now he's going to start a series of speeches today on Matthew 23 that will end in chapter 25 with that whole section about the end times and how different that is from what we are accustomed to, and we discussed it a little bit earlier in our Bible study here for those who came early. So far, so good. So just giving you guys enough to know sort of what's happening. Last big speech. After it, prison, flogging, death, supper, all those things that you know. We'll get there eventually. So that was number one thing I wanted to review. Number two thing I wanted to review is that last week we talked about how the love for God and others is the summary of law and prophets. You guys remember that? You want to understand what the Old Testament is about? It's about loving God and loving others. How do we do that? I just shared it a minute ago. Loving others, being grateful for God for the love received. So that's huge, and that's very important, and that will shape the speech in Matthew chapter 23. You must understand, Pharisees and scribes and all of us, what it looks like when you truly love God and you love others. All right, I think we're ready. Are we ready to go now? Yes? Good. Two things I'm going to talk about today. You're going to see that Jesus is going to speak about two main things. The problem of hypocrisy and the problem of how do people imagine authority in the hierarchies that are appearing with that sense of authority. Are we together? How many of you know what hypocrisy means? What does hypocrisy mean? And I'm not going to ask for the expert because that would be really horrible, right? I asked for who's the expert on hypocrisy? I couldn't do that. That would be bad. But what is hypocrisy? What? So what is a hypocrite, Gina? Tell me. Give me an idea. What is a hypocrite? Yeah, that's a good way to put it. By the way, hypocrite in the Greek is people who wear masks. Not the masks that protect you from COVID. Although, now these days everything is everything. Literal masks that, you look at the face of the person, you're like, who am I talking to? Because you don't know. Have you guys ever had that feeling? In Brazil, I had it all the time. You had colleagues and stuff, and you start sort of sharing your heart, and then 2 days later, you're called into somebody's office, and you're like, what? We've heard that you're talking about. I said, what? How did you know? Oh, yeah, that person. And I said, wow. And then suddenly you're like, what? Sharon sort of knows what I'm talking about. It's like, have you ever had the feeling that when you're looking at somebody and speaking with them, you have no idea who you're talking with because you know that there's more behind there than what we realize? That's sort of where hypocrisy is. Yes, it has to do with practices, meaning that whatever I ask others or expect of others, I don't do myself. But all of that comes from this sense of fake, superficial, mask-wearing, double-faced sort of realities. That's hypocrisy, and Jesus hates it. That's why in every single miracle, remember one of my favorites is the woman at the well. Remember the woman at the well in the Gospel of John? She's there in the midday because she's not allowed to do the religious services in her own town. She's a pagan. Jesus comes in, and the first thing he asks is, where is your husband and all those other things? Because I can't connect with you if we're wearing masks. So let's remove them, and then we might have something going together. So are you guys with me? So hypocrisy, trying to make others, perceive something in you that's not true. It's not real. Like an actor. Great point. Like an actor. Like you're dealing with somebody who's playing a role that is not truly them. Right? All right. So now we're ready to go. Hypocrisy, authority, hierarchy. Matthew chapter 23, verse 1. Uno. Let's go. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Let's pause here for a second. What do you think that is? Every synagogue, do you remember the synagogue? What we compare the church with? Every Sabbath morning they came together to read, right? Women had to sit in a room in the back because they could not hang out with the men. So if we want to keep law, guys, you don't know what you're asking for. So that's sort of one of the rules there. And in the synagogue, there was normally a place where they called Moses' seat. Who do you think it was for? It was for the person who was going to read the scriptures and share, right? He would sit, wait for his time, he would get up and share the word. And why was it called Moses' seat? Because from that seat, they not only shared the words of Moses and the prophets, but they were also giving their interpretations, legislating, talking to people about the things that were necessary for them to live appropriately before God. That's what Jesus is talking about here. The scribes who are versed in the Bible, and the Pharisees who are sort of the lay leaders who are deep students of the Bible and try to follow it, they sit on Moses' seat, exercising authority, legislating. Now here comes Jesus. So, do and observe whatever they tell you. That's fine. but don't do the works that they do. Why? For they preach, Gina, and you were on the ball there, but do not practice. Gotta love Jesus, right? Could you? No wonder he was killed, right? I mean, it's simple. No, not hard to see how that would come about. Verse 4. What else did they do? They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders. But they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. Verse 5. They do all of their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. Hard words here. Phylacteries were little pouches, leather pouches where they kept the prayer, the text, whatever they were reading. And when they showed it, everybody was like, oh, that guy is like carrying a Bible around today. That would be sort of the equivalent, right? It's like, oh, that guy carries the Bible. In Brazil, that was very common when I was growing up. People carry that. Walk to church from wherever they're carrying the Bible. The shortest way to church was one, but there was a bar, 300 meters away, so they would make sure they went in front of the bar, too. Like this. And gave that little smirk of, too bad. I wish you knew the truth, right? So that was, yeah. One day I'll tell you a story about how one of those guys found me at the bar, but that's another story. All right. I wasn't drinking, by the way, so don't worry. Just hanging out. Yeah. Cool place to hang out, by the way. Bars. Great people. Not a lot of masks in there. You know what I mean? Not a lot of masks. A lot of masks in buildings like this, but not in the bar. Or in the golf course. A few masks in the golf course, actually, Dave. Anyway, you know the mood. So they do all their deeds to be seen by others, for their phylacteries broad and their fringes, the robes that they wear for prayer, their prayer shawls, they make it like their whole appearance thing. And they love the place of honor at feasts, and the best seats in the synagogue, in greetings in the marketplace, and being called Rabbi, Master, Teacher by others. So there you go. Let's pause here. Are we good though so far? Are we doing all right? I know it was a long introduction, but we're going to get there eventually. So Jesus, friends, as you can see, is this like a very nice speech, flowery? No, it's pretty hard, isn't it? He's like literally exposing, showing that internal x-ray of motivation. Jesus is literally saying, and by the way, are we able to do this with others? Yes or no? Am I able to turn to Jason, to Zibian and say, you do things because you want to be seen by others? Can I do that as a pastor? Yes or no? I can't. Why? There's one huge difference between pastors and Jesus and all of us and Jesus. And what's that difference? Jesus sees what is inside. And guess what? No x-ray will show us anything about one another, so we don't know. So the point here is not to take it to apply it to others. The point here is to x-ray our own heart. Because the only person who knows your intentions is you and God. That's it. Are we together? Yes or no? Good. Let's keep reading. Let's keep thinking. So, hard speech here. Jesus always spoke in a different tone when he addressed religious hypocrisy. Nothing filled him with more anger than this. Jesus abhors those who sit in the midst of people, asking them to do that which they themselves do not. So the community of Jesus, my friends, must not work within a structure where my devotion to God is a burden to my neighbor by way of religious expectations. Are we together? Yes or no? I'm a vegetarian, therefore... No. You go and do that. Leave your brother in peace. And that's whole Paul's argument in Romans, because whatever he's doing before his God. Are you now the guy who's going to legislate who's who? Don't do it. So we need to adjust our expectations of one another so that our devotion to God doesn't become a burden to us and to others as well. But there's more. We cannot have a devotion to God where my religion is framed by what I expect others to do, sis, but that I don't do myself. Right? And I'm sure I could give example after example of myself and others and other experiences that you've been a part of where you've seen that before. Right? I was friends with a bunch of kids who were pastors' kids back in the day. Most of them, by the way, not part of any church these days. I was fortunate to grow up in a household, and you guys know my parents already, where truly, whatever you saw up front was what you found at home. They were not people who were used to faking it. And that always moved me. That always moved me. So the reality is, we know deep down what that hypocrisy looks like, don't we? Of sharing with others, of being with others, and expecting them to do what we do not do ourselves. Jesus does not like it. And yet, how much of religion these days is exactly that, right? This expectation, the exchange, and expecting others to do what we do not. So, obviously, as I said, the Pharisees, again, Jesus is hard on them, but these were people who were waiting for the renewal of Israel. They wanted to see the day when the Romans wouldn't be around, and they worried about the influence of secular culture, Hellenistic culture. So many of these religious rules and things that they did was to prevent people from sinning, right? So it's very similar to us today. Secular, how sermons go, the world out there is pushing us, so we need to be careful. And then the tendency normally is to go radical, sort of legalistic, protecting people, and there's a place for that. So these guys were trying to do something good to protect the people from the culture, and they feared God, were devoted to Him. And Jesus, by the way, did not disagree with them as much as people think He did. He just said it. Whatever they're telling you to do, do that, but don't do as they do it. That was the issue. Like, they're teaching you about Moses and the prophets. That's phenomenal. That's good. Do that, but don't do it as they are doing it. That was the issue, not exactly what they were teaching itself. So, the concern of Jesus reveals one aspect of the religious sensibility that is still true today, worrying about externals while forgetting what happens inside, the motivations, and how they lead to an external life of mercy, justice, and love. By the end of this speech, Jesus says that you are doing so many little things and you have forgotten the weightier things of the law. And then Jesus says justice, love, and mercy, which we consider superficial these days. That's the weightier things. So I don't know. I've told you many stories before. I told you this story that I'm going to tell you now before, so I'll tell it again just because it's a proof of the whole thing. And although I'm speaking about a ex-teacher of mine back in Brazil, I've done it as well. Expected people to do that which I was not doing. Tony, I was in seminary in Brazil. 17 years old. Finished high school early because we went to the United States, went back to Brazil. I sort of swooped in and sort of finished it. High school when I was 17, went to college. When you go to seminary in Brazil when you're 17, by the way, you're sitting with people who are 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 30-year-old. It's like a wide range of people, but the level of expectation from the teachers is the same for everybody. So, people used to dress with a tie and trimmed, no beard or anything like that, hair to the side. Everybody was like a little robots in there. And that was sort of, so the expectation for a 30-year-old was the same as for the 17-year-old. And when you're 17, by the way, you're not feeling very holy, I'll tell you that, I was worried about maybe playing my guitar and playing basketball and looking at the ladies, Jason, out there and seeing what was out there. Those are the things that consume me, more than the zeal of the Lord, let's say. And the expectation was the zeal. So it was a confusing, because, you're 17. As I look back, I'm like, you're 17, what do you, and I was a teacher later, and I was like, anyway, whole thing, right? So one day, I was in class, and by then I was not 17 anymore. I think I was 19 or something, 2 years already in. And I was in a class, Jason, with the first-year students just coming in, and one of these teachers, one who is still very vocal and famous in Brazil, who's still out there, he decided to just start the whole class, Donna, with a speech like Jesus, toward the Pharisees, but in this case, the students were the problem, and obviously he had a few words to the students. And the words were basically that he had heard that in the dormitories, in the dorm rooms where we were, there was a huge lack of spiritual, excitement in reality, because all the theology students were playing around and goofing around and not being the pastors, Leslie, that they should have been, at 17 years old. So, Wendy, you already know sort of how I would have reacted to that. I was sitting in the back and just had my head down. And by then I had a more difficult time controlling my feelings. These days I can take much more, hopefully. But I was just like holding my head down and thinking, oh Lord. But he didn't stop. It was like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just going after this. And I'm sitting there thinking, my God. And then I, raised the hand. And then I said, Professor, I hear all that you're saying, but you see, I've been here at least 2 years now, and I have never seen one theology teacher step into the dorm room to speak with anybody. Ever. So how can you expect us to live in a particular way when you have never shown how we should do that? Are you guys with me? So although I'm using an example that is not myself, I'm telling you right now, I've done the same. I've expected of Paul and my children in the past things that I didn't do myself. I've expected of colleagues in the past, of students, things that so it's part of, I'm not saying pointing the finger at the teacher, I'm just pointing the finger at a common condition that we all might have of teaching and sharing and expecting things of others that we do not do ourselves. And when we are transparent about these things, as Jesus is expecting His community to be, then maybe we have a healthier situation happening with one another, don't we? Where my shortcomings is not an offense, it's not a problem. Where your shortcomings is not an offense to my religion, where we can sit together and share our brokenness, our fears, and our hopes. To having the church become a therapeutic community and not just a place where truth is, are you guys a therapeutic community? Where we leave lighter and better, with a better grasp at who Jesus is and what His religion is all about, as we treat each other with kindness and with love. So why am I going slow with this chapter? Because I want us to sort of see these things for ourselves, so that we can become this therapeutic community that truly sees one another, and calls one another, and lives with one another, values one another, and that the sin of the other is not an offense to my religion, because my religion is marked by a transparency to my own shortcomings and my own sins. Are we together? Yes or no? Yes. Good. Little more? Are we okay with a little more? I could stop right here and just continue next week. So let's do a vote. Should we continue a little bit more? A little bit more? Yes. You're visiting us. I forgot your name. Tell me. David, should we continue a little more? You're the guest, so you're the one who decides. Forget everybody else. Should we go a little, because you're leaving, so you're not going to be here next week, right? Might as well just get the full-blown meal. So let's do it together. So again, Jesus is not necessarily going after the law or Moses, but He's talking about something that is happening within, with the Pharisees, and that we are in the risk of practicing as well. So the first charge of Jesus relates to their sense of authority. We talked about hypocrisy, but their sense of authority. They legislate, they order, they enforce. In the synagogue, there were seats of Moses, but differently than Moses. And here's one insight that I was thinking about when I was reading this. It's interesting that they want to legislate like Moses, Sharon. They, right? Without the heart of Moses. And that's the thing. Just think of who Moses was. He is the guy, for those who have forgotten who Moses. Moses is the guy that when the children of Israel were like enjoying orgies in front of a golden idol, that he gets mad. He gets frustrated. And we're like, oh, okay, so it's okay to be mad. Yes, it is. But then he goes up the mountain and intercedes for these people. He says, Lord, don't wipe them out. In fact, take me out, but save them. And here is the catch of what we find in religion and in all these things. We want to legislate. We want to determine how things are. We want to sit in the seat of Moses. But what lacks in us is the heart that is doing all of these things, but willing to give one's life for the other, so that they can make. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. And it's fascinating to me how we're all caught up in that one way or another. They want the seat, but not the practice, not the self-sacrifice that includes the other in the plan of God. But we use law to raise walls, to separate, to push away so that I can have a sense that I'm holy, holy, holy. That's what we were talking about earlier. The law, walls. And as long as I'm distant from all the sinners, then I'm good. It's not Moses. The one who shared it with her. Moses was interceding for people, saying, God, work with them. Let them be part of your plan. And that's the hermeneutic for the community of the kingdom of heaven. We are not finding ways to determine if people are out, because that's what it seems, right? Oh, you go to church on a different day? Then I'm sorry, you're not. We're trying to find ways to push people out when the heart of Moses is a heart of, how can I bring people into the plan of God? That's the movement. Are you guys with me? That's how we go out. We don't go out trying to figure out how to push people out. We go out to see how we can include them, how we can remind them that there's a greater plan and a greater story, and that they can be part of that story as well. So yes, the distinction between Moses and the Pharisees is materialized by the practicing of placing burdens on others than the disposition to carry it themselves. Their religion is fake, it is outward, and does not have root in the gratitude for love received from God. And we need to be watchful. A friend of mine wrote this week something that I want to share with you, and I quote, that Pharisaic religion is constituted by care for myself and control of others, while Jesus' teaching is aimed towards self-control and care for others. Isn't that beautiful? I'll repeat it for you guys because it's just fascinating. The religion of Pharisees that Jesus is exposing here is about care for myself, control of others, mercy for me, the law for everybody else. That's one other way of putting it. Religion of Jesus is self-control and mercy and care for others. Are we there? Do we see it? What a powerful insight by my friend Hermes from Brazil. Thank you, Hermes. He's not watching this, so I'm just thanking him. Gratitude. So the question that remains out of all of this is, how is the community of Jesus to behave so that these vices of external... Because by the way, one of the hard things is that they were perceived by society, by the religious, as people who were faithful, weren't they? With all of the external, they couldn't see it through. Jesus could, and Jesus exposed so that the imagination of Israel and the church could operate by different standards. And the problem is that we're caught up in a society now that we still value those external things, don't we? Don't we? Yes or no? If I came up here with a suit today and a tie, looking all that, and say, guys, let me just tell you what the word of the Lord is, and tap the thing and walk over, I was like, oh, that guy is onto something. That guy has been with the Lord. If you're in the Pentecostal circles, I have Pentecostal friends, and they always say, if there's somebody up church that says, and it speaks a word, and everybody's like, oh, there's something. It's still in our culture. We think that these external things are the thing. It's not. They're not. And that's what Jesus is trying to teach. So the question that remains, and I'm not going to explore today, the plan was, so I'm glad I'm chopping this up in pieces because it would have been too long. It's already too long right now. But the question is then, how is the community to behave? What sense of authority? How are they to reshape their imaginations into something that will not allow externals to be the thing? That we will recognize the goodness and the things that truly matter to God. So Jesus will touch upon one of the elements that consumed the imagination of the people and ours to this day, and the issue is authority. How we imagine authority to be. What it is, how it should be exercised, and how it should structure the community of Jesus. And this is where we are going to hit pause. Plan was to keep going, but I think we've been through enough. So today I talked about this, and I'm changing this to 1 through 8. Next time we'll go down here. So now that we know this problem, how do we fix it? By reimagining what authority and how our community is structured. If that is fixed, then we have a better shot. And by the way, this is what we've been doing together thus far, right? So we're going to be all right, but I'll leave that second part for next time we're together. Is that okay? Yeah. For now, friends, go out and love people. Go out and embrace people. Raise them up. What was that, Troy? We're not done yet. Oh, no, yeah, there's still to. I'm always amazed at how much, yeah. Anyway, so thank you for bearing with me. Did we learn something together today? Yes or no? Good. So are we leaving home a little bit better, a little bit lighter, a little bit happier? Yes or no? Then go and share that with others as well. Let's pray together. Dear God, thank you for your word. Thank you for Jesus, that even in his hard words, we are able to be reborn. Our imaginations are able to be expanded so that we might see the will of God in a clear and better way, thanks to Jesus. So bless us as we grow together as a community of faith, and as we serve our larger community of Santa Fe. We thank you for all of these good things, and we ask them in the name of Jesus. Amen. Friends, be well, be safe out there, and above all things, be kind. I'll see you next week.